The dining room was filled with a ringing silence, broken only by the delicate clinking of silverware against porcelain. Yet, amidst this symphony of sounds, only my father's authoritative voice truly stood out. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his fingers nervously clutching a sweating glass of iced tea, and declared with unwavering conviction, "Real men don't settle for rented accommodation. They aspire to own their home, a fortress, a symbol of their achievements." There was no shouting, but his words resonated like a final verdict, delivered from the height of his life experience. Across from him, Derek, my cousin, smirked smugly, as if adding fuel to an already simmering conflict. "Yeah, if you can even afford it, that is," he added with biting irony, and his laughter echoed through the tense atmosphere of the room. The rest of the family nervously chuckled, sensing the escalating tension, but I remained unfazed, maintaining a poker face. Seated at this table were people whose opinions held immense significance for me, individuals who, to varying degrees, shaped who I was. My father, Martin, whose value system measured masculinity by mortgages and square footage. My mother, Clara, who tried in vain to soften the sting of his words and smooth things over. My uncle Frank, Derek's father, who nodded approvingly every time his son boasted about his accomplishments. My younger sister, Layla, a quiet observer who knew more about me than anyone else at that table. And of course, Derek, the golden boy cousin, who never missed an opportunity to highlight my shortcomings. The tension in the air thickened, the laughter gradually subsided, giving way to an awkward silence. I carefully scanned those present. Their eyes, filled with undisguised curiosity, awaited my reaction, anticipating my embarrassment or a defensive explanation. Instead, I slowly retrieved a folder from my bag and, without a word, slid it across the table to the man seated next to me. He wasn't just a family friend, he was my personal attorney. The room instantly froze, as if time had stopped. Forks hung suspended in midair, food left uneaten, chairs scraped back as everyone leaned forward to get a better view. My father's confident gaze wavered, and Derek's smug smirk vanished as the attorney cleared his throat and opened the folder. In that moment, with all eyes fixed on me, I decided the truth would speak for itself. The truth was, family dinners at my house had always been a challenging ordeal. From the outside, they appeared warm and idyllic, like something out of a glossy magazine. But once everyone took their seats, the friendly meal transformed into a battlefield, rife with unspoken comparisons, veiled judgments, and subtle psychological battles for the title of the most successful family member. Roast chicken and fragrant buttered rolls merely served as a facade for the sharpness of verbal jabs that invariably turned dinner into a competition. My father, Martin, always presided at the head of the table, as if on a throne. He spoke in a tone that brooked no argument, as if laying down the law rather than merely expressing an opinion. In his frame of reference, men proved their worth by what they owned. A home was the ultimate symbol of success, a trophy of sorts, signifying that you had achieved recognition, could stake your claim to a piece of the world, and call it your own. Renting, for him, was a sign of weakness and failure. He often repeated, "If you're paying rent, you're just making someone else rich." He'd say this to neighbors, casual acquaintances, anyone who would listen. But when he said it to me, his words stung particularly hard, as he never missed an opportunity to remind me how, in his view, I fell short of his expectations. My mother, Clara, sat to his right. She was soft-spoken and gentle by nature, one of those women who apologize even when they've done nothing wrong. She tried to smooth over sharp edges when father's words cut too deep, but her voice was often drowned out by his authoritative tone. She would place a hand on his arm or quietly utter my name in support, but she never offered open resistance. She was the glue that held our family together. But even glue has its breaking point. Then there was my cousin, Derek. A smug smirk of a man confident in his victory was plastered across his face. He loved to make biting jokes at my expense, knowing it would elicit approving laughter from my father or Uncle Frank. He was the kind of guy who'd boast about his new pickup truck, his latest vacation, or a generous bonus at work. He thrived when he was the center of attention, when he was admired. It didn't matter how significant what he was saying was. The important thing was that he was heard. Derek was the son my father always wanted. And I was quiet and unassuming, the one who never participated in the show. Uncle Frank, Derek's father, was like an echo of my own father. He shared his traditional views, believing that money and property defined a person's worth. He didn't need any proof. If Derek said something, Frank would immediately clap him on the back and express his pride. He was one of those uncles who ask questions out of politeness but never truly listen to the answers. On the other side of the table, like a beacon in a turbulent sea of misunderstanding, sat Layla, my younger sister. Only she seemed to grasp the weight of the silent burden I carried. Her gaze, meeting mine during these dinners, spoke without words. I see the real you. I know you better than they think. She didn't openly confront my father or the rest of the family, but her quiet presence served as a constant reminder that I wasn't entirely invisible. That evening, the culinary aroma of roasted garlic and seasoned potatoes mingled with the subtle sweetness of cooling apple pie, creating a deceptively cozy atmosphere. Flashes of laughter seemed to momentarily disperse the tension, but it invariably returned to the age-old subtext: who is more successful? Who makes the right decisions? Who lives up to the family's unspoken rules? When Father declared, "Real men buy a home they don't rent," his words hung in the air like lead weights, silencing even the appetizing smells. I felt dozens of eyes, like spotlights, turn on me. The fact that I had been renting an apartment downtown for several years made me less masculine in their eyes. Mother, ever the peacemaker, tried to diffuse the awkwardness. "Martin, times are different now," she gently remarked. "Things aren't as simple as they used to be." But Derek, like a hawk, seized the opportunity before her words could take root. "Yeah, if you can even afford it," he sneered with a smug grin. Leaning back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head, he reveled in the ensuing wave of laughter. Uncle Frank grunted his approval, and even Father couldn't suppress a smile. But I didn't laugh. I didn't object. I maintained an impassive expression, my hands resting calmly on the table. Inside, however, something was simmering. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let them define me with a single sentence. They only saw the apartment I rented, but they didn't see the sleepless nights I spent working on freelance projects after my day job, my eyes open until dawn. They didn't see the weekends I spent not at parties, but studying investments and mastering new skills. They didn't see the years I gave up fleeting pleasures to build something greater, something lasting. The truth was, I had been preparing for this moment for a long, long time. I didn't need to defend myself with words, because I had already written my answer in actions. I had saved, invested, and taken risks in ways they couldn't even imagine. And I did it all in silence, without fanfare, without needing their approval. But in that moment, listening to my father's condescending comments and Derek's biting laughter, I felt a sharp pang of being underestimated. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the years of being dismissed as falling behind, not meeting their high standards of success. The weight of my father's words continued to press on me, like an unbearable burden, as dinner progressed, but the atmosphere at the table gradually shifted. Every comment, one way or another, circled back to the theme of success, ownership, and what it meant to be a real man. This wasn't new. These conversations had shaped my family for as long as I could remember. Today, however, it stung particularly deep because they weren't discussing someone abstract. They were talking about me. Derek, like a fish in water, was in his element. Leaning forward and carving a piece of chicken, he began recounting his latest big deal at work. He shamelessly exaggerated his work hours, his responsibilities, and how his boss simply couldn't manage without him. Uncle Frank nodded proudly, hanging on every detail. When Derek mentioned he was already looking at houses with his realtor, Father's face lit up as if he'd just heard about a championship win. "That's how it's done," Father declared didactically, emphasizing his words with his fork. "You put down roots, you build equity, you give your family something to stand on." But as he spoke, he wasn't looking at Derek. He was looking at me. It wasn't a compliment. It was a weapon. Mother tried to interject again. "Martin, everyone has different opportunities," she said softly, gently placing a hand on his arm. But Father merely brushed her words aside with a short chuckle. "Opportunities are everywhere if you know how to seize them," he stated firmly. "It's all about priorities. Some men rent because they're frivolous or don't think about the future, but a real man makes sacrifices now to secure his future." Derek's smirk widened, and he mockingly tilted his head toward me. "Yeah, or maybe some just lack the ability." The subsequent tirade hung heavy in the air, creating a tension that felt like thin blades scraping across glass. Uncle Frank let out a restrained chuckle, and a faint smirk flickered on my father's lips. I remained silent, determined not to betray my inner turmoil. I wouldn't let Derek or father dictate my reaction, displaying an unflappable composure in the face of their barbs. Layla, sitting opposite me, narrowed her eyes slightly, casting a quick glance at Derek. Though she said nothing, I felt the disappointment radiating from her. She shared my distaste for these moments, but knew I wouldn't rise to the bait. Layla knew me well enough to understand that my silence wasn't a sign of defeat, but rather a display of restrained strength. Nevertheless, the tension in the room continued to mount with each passing minute. Father's voice became an anchor for the conversation, repeatedly drawing everyone back to his definition of masculinity. He recounted how he had bought his first home at 23, how he worked tirelessly at 2 jobs to achieve his dream, and how he expected his children to show the same determination. His stories, however, weren't inspiring. They merely served as a means to measure my accomplishments and find them lacking. I listened intently to every word, even as the weight of resentment pressed on my chest. I understood that behind my silence lay something Father couldn't see. I had already made countless sacrifices, spent sleepless nights and weekends working tirelessly instead of resting. For years, I had denied myself many things, and no one at this table had any inkling of it. Father and Derek only saw the surface, a rented apartment and a quiet life. They had no idea what I was building beneath it all. Nonetheless, their words still stung, not because they were true, but because I had allowed them to define me for too long. I had grown up in the shadow of Father's expectations, constantly feeling the need to prove my worth to him. And Derek, with his arrogance and easy approval from Father and Uncle Frank, was a living reminder of everything they believed I wasn't. The more they spoke, the clearer it became that it wasn't just about a house. It was about respect, about being seen for who I truly was, not the caricature they had painted. Derek leaned back in his chair and wiped his mouth with a napkin before speaking again. "You know, I've already scoped out a place in Fairview. 4 bedrooms, backyard, the whole 9 yards. Now that's what I call investing in your future." He paused, then shot me a glance with the same mocking smirk. "But hey, renting isn't bad either. You just can't call it your own." Father nodded approvingly, smiling proudly at Derek as if he'd already handed him the keys to the house. "That's the right mindset," he said. "Property is everything." Then his eyes turned back to me. "You'd be smart to start thinking that way too." After those words, silence fell over the table, everyone awaiting my reaction. Every eye seemed fixed on me, expecting me to become defensive, argue, or finally break under the weight of their words. But I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. I simply met their gaze and remained calm. Inside, however, a decision had already solidified. This argument wouldn't end with more words or futile arguments. I had been preparing for this for too long. My answer wouldn't be spoken, it would be shown. I mentally revisited the years I had spent pursuing my goal. I recalled the spreadsheets I'd studied, the budgets I'd cut to the bone, and the opportunities I'd chased, even when they seemed impossible. I thought of the moments I'd almost given up, wondering if the sacrifices were worth it, and if the quiet path I'd chosen would lead to the desired outcome. And I remembered the folder next to me. The papers inside represented not just property, but proof. Proof that I wasn't who they thought I was. The tension in the room built like a thundercloud, thick and ready to burst. Derek's laughter, Father's pride, Mother's worried glances, Layla's quiet understanding, all merged into a single heavy silence that pressed down on me. And in that silence, I knew the time had come, the moment when I would no longer be the one quietly sitting in the shadow of their judgment. The moment when the truth I had held would finally surface and leave them speechless. The silence that descended upon the table was like a searing blow, surpassing any of Derek's barbs. Father scrutinized me, searching for signs of weakness, expecting a defensive reaction or at least an attempt to justify myself. But I remained unfazed, giving him no satisfaction. There was no need, for my decision had been made long before this evening. They didn't suspect that each perceived failure they scoffed at was part of a grander plan. While Derek boasted about his expensive cars and lavish vacations, I was methodically cutting every unnecessary expense. While Father insisted that renting was a senseless waste of money, I diligently saved for something far greater than just one house. I wasn't interested in quick ways to make a fleeting impression on them. I sought to build genuine freedom, the kind that wouldn't require their approval. Memories surfaced of nights spent alone at the kitchen table, illuminated by the flickering glow of a laptop screen. I meticulously researched real estate listings, analyzed market reports until my eyes blurred with fatigue. I independently acquired knowledge and skills that others preferred to pay professionals for. I attended seminars, modestly taking seats in the back rows, listening more than speaking. I took risks that, in their opinion, were beyond my capabilities. And of course, along this path, I experienced failures. Deals fell through at the last minute, offers were rejected, money slipped through my fingers when meticulously laid plans crumbled. But every mistake I made became a valuable lesson, teaching me to avoid repeating missteps and to better prepare for the next steps. I recalled evenings when I settled for instant noodles just to put a little more money into my savings. Weekends, missed gatherings with friends because I had to work overtime. And moments when I wanted to share my successes with Father, but I held back, knowing he wouldn't believe me until he saw it with his own eyes. All these sacrifices, all these deprivations, led to this pivotal moment. Layla leaned across the table toward me, her voice quiet and concerned. "Why do you let them talk to you like that?" There was no reproach in her words, only genuine defense. It pained her to see me cornered. I turned my head slightly and smiled calmly back at her. "I don't need to engage in a verbal battle with them," I whispered. "The truth will soon reveal itself." She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. She didn't fully understand what I meant, but she sensed something significant was coming. I looked back at Derek, who was in full swing, pontificating about how renting was like throwing money into a bottomless pit. He was trying to impress Father and Uncle Frank, basking in their approving glances as if under spotlights. Arrogance oozed from him, but it no longer bothered me, not like it used to, because I knew that just inches from my hand lay the folder containing my answer. This folder wasn't just a collection of papers. It was proof of years of work, contracts sealed with my signature, proclaiming me not just a renter, not just someone who bought a house, but the owner of something far greater. It was the culmination of every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every quiet step I took while they laughed and doubted me. I had invited my attorney to this dinner under the innocent guise of a family friend. No one suspected anything amiss, as my family enjoyed having guests. They had no idea he carried documents that could fundamentally alter the course of the conversation. I had meticulously calculated this moment, not out of malice, but because I understood words alone wouldn't change their perception. They needed to see the evidence, laid out on paper, notarized, undeniable. The decision to keep my success secret until this evening hadn't been easy. There were times I was ready to throw the truth in Derek's face when he mocked me, times when I wanted to shout at Father and prove to him that he no longer understood how the world worked, but I held back. I knew that patience would make the triumph of truth even more resounding when it finally revealed itself. And now, watching their laughter and boasts, I felt a quiet calm within me. The storm was coming, but they were still oblivious. An atmosphere of unawareness hung in the dining room, like the calm before a storm. I slowly reached out and touched the folder, my fingers brushing against the cool leather cover. Holding my breath, I deliberately prolonged the moment, anticipating how the suspense would amplify the impact of the impending revelation. Father once again commanded attention, his voice absolute. "Someday you'll understand, Ethan," he declared. "A man is judged not by the home he rents, but by the home he owns." I looked up and met his penetrating gaze. "I understand that perfectly, Dad," I replied. Derek let out a mocking chuckle, shaking his head as if privy to some secret. "Of course you do," he sneered. I slid the folder across the table to the lawyer seated beside me. He straightened up, his face exuding professional confidence, his hand resting on the documents as if awaiting a signal to act. Silence fell over the room. Mother froze, fork in hand. Layla was the first to sense the shift, her eyes widening slightly. Derek frowned, confused. Father raised an eyebrow, his patience wearing thin. This was a decision I had nurtured for years, allowing them to underestimate me until the moment I would present proof of my achievements. not with anger or arguments, but with facts so undeniable they couldn't be refuted. As the lawyer opened the folder, I leaned back in my chair, radiating calm and confidence. The era of silence was over. The truth was about to take its seat at the table. The folder's movement across the polished table seemed to freeze all sounds in the room. The clinking of glasses, the scraping of cutlery, and even Derek's smug commentary ceased. My lawyer, Daniel, adjusted his tie, opened the cover, and presented a stack of fresh legal documents, complete with stamps and signatures. Despite his casual demeanor, in that moment, he was completely in control. Derek leaned forward, his smirk replaced by confusion. "What is that?" he asked, his voice laced with mockery and uncertainty. Daniel cleared his throat. "These are the final closing documents. Ethan completed the acquisition of all the properties on this street this week." His words carried weight, surpassing any argument. For a moment, everyone froze. Father was rigid, fork still raised. Mother covered her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Uncle Frank's gaze darted between me and Daniel, as if expecting someone to confess to a prank. Derek broke the silence with a nervous chuckle. "Wait, what? The whole street? No way!" He turned to me, searching for any hint of deception, but my calm gaze offered him no solace. Daniel tapped the documents. "It's all here. Deeds, contracts, signatures. Every house on this block now belongs to Ethan. This isn't just a show. These are legally binding documents." The silence deepened further. The air grew thick with tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Derek's smirk vanished completely, replaced by a pale and strained expression. Uncle Frank shifted in his chair, his jaw working as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Father stared at me, his eyes reflecting both surprise and unease. "You bought a house?" he asked, a tremor in his voice betraying the shock hidden beneath his stern facade. I leaned back in my chair, calm and unflustered. "Not a house, Father. The street. The very street you raised me on. The very one Derek was looking to buy. I wasn't wasting money on rent, Dad. I was building something that couldn't be laughed at across this table." My words landed like a bombshell. Mother blinked, holding back tears, torn between pride and disbelief. Layla offered a subtle smile, her gaze meeting mine in silent triumph. Derek, unable to contain himself, slammed his fist on the table. "This is insane. How could you possibly afford all this? You don't even—" He trailed off, sputtering in his own astonishment. I met his gaze. "While you boasted about every paycheck, I was working. While you sought approval, I sought opportunities. I lived small so I could think big. And now, I don't just own a house, I own the entire block." A tense silence hung in the air as the declaration, "I own this block," resonated. Uncle Frank seemed to snap out of his stupor, but his voice betrayed a tremor. "This can't be. Fortunes like this don't just appear out of nowhere." Daniel preempted my answer. "This is no accident. Ethan has worked meticulously for years to make this a reality. Every signature on these documents is a testament to his perseverance. His astute financial strategy, iron discipline, and calculated investments led him to this triumph." I felt the crushing weight of their disbelief, but it no longer stung as sharply as before. This was the very moment I'd eagerly awaited, the instant when restraint transformed into an unyielding power. Father slowly put down his cutlery, his face inscrutable. For the first time in his life, he had no ready judgment. He scrutinized me as if seeing me for the first time. "Did you really do this?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Yes," I replied, my voice even and full of conviction. "I did." Silence reigned at the table. Derek's smug bravado evaporated instantly. His face paled, his jaw clenched. Mother gently touched my hand, her eyes shining with pride and remorse. Uncle Frank leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. Father, a man who always spoke with unshakable certainty, now struggled for words. "I never thought," he stammered, then continued, "I underestimated you, son." Father's admission was no less deafening than the silence that had followed Daniel's declaration. He had built his life on infallibility, on having the last word, and now he sat, stripped of his usual certainty. Derek tried to regain his composure, but his voice trembled. "So what? You think this makes you better? Owning a bunch of houses isn't... I cut him off, not with anger, but with quiet confidence. It's not about being better. It's about proving that I never needed to conform to your ideas of success. I didn't need to shout about my accomplishments or flaunt them. I built my future in silence. And today, that silence speaks louder than all your words. The room plunged into silence once more. There was no laughter, no sarcastic remarks, only the heavy weight of truth, palpable in the air. I felt no exultation. I didn't need to. The power of the moment wasn't in triumphing over them. It was in the stillness that followed the revelation, in the shift in their gazes as they saw me differently for the first time. Father finally leaned back, his shoulders slumping, his face reflecting an inner struggle, yet also a softening. I was wrong, he admitted in a quiet voice. You've achieved more than I ever imagined possible. For the first time in years, his words weren't a judgment. They held respect. Layla looked at me with quiet pride, her faint smile speaking volumes. Mother gently squeezed my hand, and tears finally welled in her eyes. Derek sat in silence, stripped of his armor of arrogance. And me? I sat calmly, my heart at peace with the knowledge that years of sacrifice had led to this moment. The room that once measured me by its standards now had no choice but to acknowledge my own. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was mine. The silence that had settled in the dining room gradually ceased to be tense and took on a cleansing quality. The air, previously thick with judgment and mockery, now carried something different, heavier, yet more truthful. For the first time, no one tried to speak over another. Mother was the first to break the quiet. She reached across the table and took my hand in both of hers, her eyes filling with tears. "Ethan, I had no idea," she whispered, her voice trembling with pride. "You carried all this alone, and I'm so proud of you." Her words touched me more deeply than any insult. They weren't just about the block or the money. They were about the acknowledgement of years of effort I had carefully hidden. Father, Martin, leaned back in his chair, his posture no longer radiating authority, his hands resting calmly on his knees, his expression thoughtful. For the first time in his life, he seemed smaller, not from weakness, but from shaken certainty. He cleared his throat, trying to find the right words. "Son," he began slowly, "I judged you too quickly. I thought I understood what it meant to build a life, but you've shown me something different. I thought you were falling behind. Now I see you were working on something I could never have imagined. I just couldn't have imagined it." The admission that escaped his lips was like a thunderclap, as if an impregnable fortress had crumbled. In all the years I'd known him, he had never once uttered a word of apology. His pride seemed unshakable. And now he was admitting his own mistake. This moment meant immeasurably more than all the legal documents, more than the stunned silence hanging between my cousin and uncle. It was the acknowledgement, the respect I had subconsciously yearned for. Layla gave me a radiant smile from across the table. Words were unnecessary. Her eyes spoke louder than any phrase. She had always sensed that I was hiding something more, that true potential lay beneath the facade of an underachiever. Now she saw the truth, and her pride radiated a light visible only to me. Derek cringed in his seat, his bravado vanished like smoke. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line, and his hands clutched his knees nervously. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. My cousin, always ready with a witty retort, was silent this time, and that silence spoke volumes. Uncle Frank merely shook his head, his jaw tight. He didn't congratulate me, didn't acknowledge my triumph, but his averted gaze spoke volumes. His son had been shamed, and he didn't know how to accept it. My victory, however, wasn't in their reactions. It wasn't about watching Derek shrink into the background or seeing Father wrestle with his ego. The true victory was in my inner calm, in the realization that I had remained true to myself. For years I had worked in the shadows, building my future step by step, while others judged me by their superficial standards. And now, in a single moment, I had proven to them that true strength doesn't require constant validation. Later, as the guests began to disperse, Father pulled me aside by the door. His voice was quiet, tinged with hesitation. "You've done something incredible, Ethan. I want you to know. I'm proud of you." I studied his face, etched with wrinkles, the marks of years lived and beliefs solidified. For the first time, he looked at me not as a disappointment, but as an equal. "Thank you, Dad," I replied simply. That was all I needed. After everyone had left, Layla stayed to help Mother clean up. She found me alone in the hallway and offered a warm smile. "I always knew you had something up your sleeve," she said, her eyes sparkling with pride. I chuckled softly, the tension gradually receding. "I wasn't hiding anything from you, just waiting for the right moment." She nodded. "You chose the perfect one." Stepping out of the house, I breathed in the crisp night air and walked down the street that now belonged to me. Lights glowed in the windows of the houses, unaware that these buildings were now mine. It wasn't about power or control, it was about symbolism. I had taken every doubt, every insult, every judgment, and transformed them into something tangible. I had learned a simple yet profound lesson. You don't have to fit into someone else's mold. You don't have to live by someone else's definition of success. Patience, discipline, and hard work can create a future that speaks louder than any words. Father's words at the table came back to me. A man is judged not by where he lives, but by what he owns. He considered owning a home the ultimate measure of success, but I had gone further. Not to outdo him, not to humiliate Derek, but to build something lasting on my own terms. The night's silence seemed to echo my thoughts. Sometimes, those who doubt you the most will one day be forced to acknowledge your success. And sometimes, the loudest answer is the one spoken without a single word. This is the story of that evening when my father told me, "Real men don't rent." My cousin laughed at me, and I presented documents proving I had bought the entire street. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing off. It was about patience, sacrifice, and proving to myself that I didn't need anyone's approval to build my future.